Welcome to the Affirming Village Podcast, where we center neurodivergent voices, affirm diverse ways of being, and empower families, educators, and advocates with knowledge that truly honors the whole learner. We're your co-hosts, Dr. Destiny Huff, a late diagnosed autistic ADHD mental health therapist and non-attorney special education advocate, and Lisa Baskin Wright, an ADHD and dyslexic educator and IEP coach. Together, we dig into conversations about neuroaffirming practices, special education, and disability rights. Please remember, nothing shared on this podcast is medical or legal advice, and the views shared here by the host and the guest are their personal opinions. This space is for educational purposes only, to help you feel informed, empowered, and never alone in the village. Welcome to Affirming Village, the podcast where parents, educators, administrators, and related service providers come together to explore what truly neuroaffirming support looks like for neurodivergent learners.
Whether you're raising neurodivergent kids, teaching them, supporting them in schools, or providing services, this is your space to learn, unlearn, and grow in community.
I am Destiny, a lead diagnosed autistic ADHD mental health therapist and advocate, raising neurodivergent learners currently in the public school system and constantly confronting the realities of navigating systems, both as a parent and as a professional.
And I'm Lisa, an ADHD and dyslexic educator, IEP coach, and mom who knows firsthand how being neurodivergent shapes not only how I show up for my now adult learners, but how I show up in advocacy spaces.
Each week, we dive into real conversations about building neuroaffirming environments, challenging outdated practices, and understanding the lived experience of neurodivergent children and adults.
And today's episode is a special one. We're pulling back the curtain on our own neurodivergence, how it impacts our parenting, how it informs our approach to advocacy, and how it deepens our commitment to creating affirming spaces for every learner.
We'll talk about unmasking as parents and professionals, understanding our sensory and emotional needs right alongside our children's, and the strengths and challenges of advocating from inside the neurodivergent experience.
No shame, no judgment, no one-size-fits-all strategies, just honesty, nuance, and experience.
So whether you're coming to the conversation as a parent, an educator, a school leader, or related service provider, you're in the right place. We cannot get that together.
We tried.
We did.
Welcome to the Affirming Village. From your two neurodivergent co-hosts who struggle to read a script, but try so hard every time.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so this is the last episode for part 1 of season 1. We're ringing like celebration bells because, Lisa and I are practicing advocates. And so we are navigating this space currently and this political climate and actually supporting neurodivergent learners in real time. And we managed to somehow record 12 episodes of our podcast. And originally, just so you guys know, it started out as we were going to do season 1. We were going to do 10 episodes. And that was it for the entire season. And as we were talking and realizing the things that were occurring and taking place and just what we were enduring and advocating for, we then had the conversation and maybe we need to split part 1 and part 2, but also add additional episodes. And that resulted in us actually adding 14
more,
because it was supposed
10 to 24.
Yeah, so we went from 10 to 24 episodes. So this idea came from somebody that Lisa works with. And it was just like, because we're navigating this space as neurodivergence ourselves, raising neurodivergence. And so we wanted to end part 1 as we go into the holiday season, just really talking about how we navigate that and how that can show up to kind of give, school leaders too and related service providers like insight into why you might receive some of the responses or reactions that you do receive from parents and, why they approach their advocacy in the way that they do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So the origin story on this to share, to pull back that curtain, um, I have hosted or run like a parents group, a neurodiversity affirming parents group for, is it 2.5 years, Destiny? It's been a little
I
while.
think
Yeah,
so.
2.5 years.
Yeah.
It started in August of 23.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a really wonderful space. Destiny's been a part of it really since the beginning. And the other day we welcomed a new member who shared their own neurodivergence. And one of
Hmm.
the other members in the group was like, so many of us are neurodivergent parents on this journey. And that's one of the reasons why this space um, is so safe and so
Right.
connected, is that we can really come here and unmask and be accommodated and supported as we're navigating, trying to advocate for our neurodivergent children with our own neurodivergence um, in mind. And so I have a little team that helps me with like all things tech, the running joke. It's really the truth. It's the running truth of the matter is that I basically have no tech skills. So I need help with my website, and they help me with kind of business planning and just keeping me grounded and sane, as does Destiny help keep me grounded and sane. But I was speaking with one of them and sharing, how this had kind of bubbled up in community. And she was saying that this is such an important topic to kind of explore. And I said, this should be something that Destiny and I talk about on the podcast. That felt more impactful and meaningful, and like we could dive in really differently than I can on Instagram or any other sort of two-dimensional space. So that's what sort of sparked this idea, I should say. But it's definitely a landscape we've been living in for quite some time.
Yeah, no, I think, just going back, so, I think it's interesting this episode kind of, how we're ending this part one is kind of how we started, right? It's kind of giving insight back into how we started and how we came into the advocacy space with our first episode, right? And again, just for that recap, if it's been a while since you listened to it, or heard, my journey, I was diagnosed after my son. And so, because we're two sides of the same coin. And then Lisa is who actually introduced me to neuroaffirming, neurodiversity affirming, and what that means. And just following her content because of the mutual community space we met in. And I was like, oh, you're like, this is my kind of person. And this is my kind of information. And giving it a name, right? Because I think that was the thing is that I always say, like, as a mental health professional, being in the field for over 15 years, I had already saw things that didn't maybe sit right or didn't just, was just kind of like, but I couldn't put a name to it. And as in any space, right, it's, supposed to be research driven, right? And so you kind of question, like, I'm feeling this way, but is there a name to it? Is there a term for it? Has anyone else talking about this? Because if not, I'm just going to sound like, oh, you just don't like it. And that doesn't, that's not, we can't back what you don't like. It's like, that's not how that works. And I think that, so again, my advocacy journey started. My son wasn't diagnosed yet, and neither was I. And then when I looked back and reflected, and after getting my diagnosis, I realized that I went through a period of burnout trying to support and advocate for him. And my husband was saying the other day, like, you can tell the space that we're in our children's educational journey now by how I am during the school year. And he expressed how I am visibly in a better place, how I am more grounded, how I am seeing through situations and things with less tears, right? Like I'm not crying, or there was times where like I was so concerned about what was going to happen that I could not sleep. Like I was so anxious that there was no sleep happening. And so now I'm running on less capacity than I had the day before. And I'm still trying to then co regulate and ground my child. And then my husband's trying to co-regulate me, but he's like, I am concerned because this is going on with my son, but also my wife is concerning me while parenting another child who is like, what's going on with mommy? Like, so my neurodivergence played a role in that, right? Because it was my capacity, my ability to regulate, but also me recognizing in that kinship with my child of like, I get exactly how you're feeling. I get exactly what you're trying to tackle and navigate and how you're struggling to communicate that. But I also am at a loss in how to support you because this is new territory for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't even know if I've shared this. I've probably shared it with you, but I don't know if I've shared it on the podcast. If I did in that first episode, because we recorded it too long ago for me to remember. But I was diagnosed as dyslexic as a child, and pre-IDEA, that old age thing again. But I did get help in school, and like got pulled out for help, and all the things. And had a poor kind of self-identity as a reader.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I just can't do that. I'm not a good student. I was always very, very strong in math. And I always just like sort of attributed that to the fact that my mom was a math teacher. And she was a very like cutting edge math teacher. Like
Mm-hmm.
she wrote courses and wrote textbooks and was really interested in problem solving. And like we've discovered her ADHD brain, self-diagnosis, of course. Um, but she just is like really curious and diving in, and right, so she was always coming up with something new and thinking about something different, and I was always kind of her guinea pig, and so I always attributed my math acumen, so to speak, to her,
Mm-hmm.
and just sort of being raised in that environment, and there's probably some truth to that.
Mm-hmm.
But like whenever I was tested as a child, my math scores would be like super, super high, and my reading comprehension would like literally be in the toilet. And
Mm-hmm.
it was just like I just sort of settled into the identity of I'm not a good reader. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not smart in that way. And I always thought I was like really good with people. Like I was highly relational and compassionate. And like, I think I am, but I also think there was a lot of masking that was going on. Like I'll
Right,
just
right.
socialize my way through this. I'll crack a joke to get me through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And a
But
lot of
like,
ADHDers do that. Like they
yeah.
joke to mask what they're really feeling.
Oh, 150%. Like I had a lot
Mm-hmm.
of like separation anxiety as a young child, and like I didn't want anybody to know that. So I was like, and it wasn't until I was an adult and really actually started doing this work that I
Mm-hmm.
really noticed that in myself. Like the more I'm joking, the more I'm like, I'll notice it like in a doctor's office. Like if I'm
Mm-hmm.
cracking a million jokes and, like changing the subject and doing that, like I don't feel comfortable with the provider. And it's a cue to myself that like this isn't a good fit and they might be lovely, but like you need something different. Um, but it wasn't until I started working with this team that's now helped me for a few years now, and they're both wonderful and they're both neurodivergent.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the very first meeting, like I don't know if I was in pajama, I don't remember. Like I don't think I was wearing a bra. Like it was one of those, right? And of course, I announced it because that's what you do, right? I was like, oh, I just came here, hair on fire, no bra, my jammies. And they were like, okay. And so at the very end of, I think, our second conversation, and of course, each meeting was supposed to be like 20 minutes and 2 hours later, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at the very end of the second meeting, one of them was like, so do you consider yourself neurodivergent? And, and I was like, well, I'm dyslexic. And then I stopped and I was like, you think I'm ADHD, don't you? And she's like, a little bit. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I remember like it was like all the pieces started to come together. And I came out and I said something to my husband and my daughter, and both of them were like, oh, 150%. And um it's really been eye-opening to look back, A, on my
Mm-hmm.
journey, like just through life as a child, but
Mm-hmm.
like as soon as I sort of had to move into this advocacy space. And
Mm-hmm.
oh, I went blurry. That's what my screen does. Um, it'll come back. For those of you that are not watching, my camera does this where if I move too much, it like blurs me out and then it
Mm-hmm.
realizes I'm still here. So quick segue. Um, because I noticed it and I couldn't not say it. That's what
Mm-hmm.
happens, right? Um, but when my daughter was younger, and I
Mm-hmm.
still do this, and Destiny still is trying to help me, is I just pedal to the metal, right? So I just remember my mom kind of getting on me at one point, like I had dropped a lot of weight, not on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I'm super stressed, I get nauseous and like lockjaw and can't eat. And like I wasn't sleeping well. I was, running a million miles a minute. I was trying to like form relationships with all the people to make it safe and okay for my daughter, even though like there were lawyers involved and it was totally chaotic. And I have a really, really hard time. Or I still do. I've gotten much better at it, but like I've never been a confrontational person. Ironically, like coming into this work where you really have to like find a way to
Mm-hmm.
have hard conversations, like that's
Mm-hmm.
always been super hard for me. Um, and there's like complete, well, I've evolved a little, but I am a people pleaser. And so, navigating that space, and this has come up in community like a number of times, that
Mm-hmm.
there are other folks in the room who are similar to me where the confrontational piece is hard.
Mm-hmm.
The coming up with what to say in the moment is hard because we become dysregulated and then we want to please and we don't want to confront and we're afraid that um, them seeing us in a bad light is going to reflect poorly on how they treat our children. We're worried about that like retribution factor. Like there's all these different
Mm-hmm.
pieces at play. And at the end of it, you're just absolutely depleted and exhausted. And um, I don't know that I've been great at developing coping strategies for that. Humor definitely is something that I fall to and is
Mm-hmm.
helpful. But I still have a really strong tendency to overbook myself, overextend myself because I genuinely like do live by the motto show up and give a shit. And that's my problem is that I can't hear about something going on and not immediately get like like emotionally invested. And
Mm-hmm.
like if I feel like I have tools that would be helpful to support a situation, I'm going to dive in. And it's like my husband will absolutely let me have it because we believe, an ADHDer. And he's just like, why are you responding to somebody on Instagram at 6:30 in the morning? And I'm like, because I'm up and they wrote me and I can't handle the notifications sitting on the screen.
No, but that's so true. And ironically, my best friend always says pot meet kettle because as moms, I will get on to her about something she's doing and she'll be like, you just did this last week. And I'm like, you're right. And it's usually like it's always like overextending or like we're sick. And instead of like down and sleeping, like we're planning
Yeah.
all the things or like our kid wants to do this and we're doing that. And so I'm the same way with Lisa, where I'm like, no, ma'am. And then I'll like voice note her and be like, I'm so exhausted because I did X, Y, and Z. Um, but what you're talking about really is that I think such that always leads to the importance of the lived experience piece because we are so empathetic and we are so caring and we genuinely want to help people. And what happens is we don't have that societal, socially appropriate. And, I hate the word appropriate. So keep in mind when I say what I'm about to say, we don't have that chip as neurodivergence when we don't have the capacity. I don't have the chip to not cuss you out. Like you taking me there and that's where I'm going because I'm dysregulated and my brain is not clicking. Don't do that societally. Don't do that societally. Now it's different as we get older and as we get more socialized and things like that in a good and bad way. Where we realize, like, okay, I shouldn't cuss you out because you're invalidating what I said about my kid. I should not get an attorney and sue you because I know that you are not following what you should be following. I should do steps before that, right? But the, you know, non-socialized part of me wants to go, you're doing things fucking wrong and stupidly, and I want it fixed.
Right. And it's, yeah, I mean, my husband is that way, right? Like, he even writes about it in his book, which I literally fell on the floor laughing when I read his description of me, which is like, beware of this woman's silence. Because for me, when I'm really dysregulated, I will go silent. And which is
Mm-hmm.
shocking because I actually need like a muzzle or like something to keep me from talking too much. But if I am really pissed and really upset, like my mom has this story that she tells, and I sort of remember it, but not really as a child. There was something that happened and I don't remember what it was. And she was like, I'm going to facilitate a conversation between Lisa and David, my brother. And whatever it was, we processed the situation. I'm using air quotes. We processed the situation. And my mom and my brother are like similar temperaments. And at the end, they were like, "Oh, that was so good. We felt so good." And I was like, "I'm even more mad than I was when we started." Like, no doubt. Um, but it's so funny because if this work, as I have like 27 half-baked thoughts, this work has actually really helped me sort of grow in those skills.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think the fact that it is a degree of separation is helpful, like an emotional degree of separation. As deeply as I care about every single family and learner that I'm supporting, they technically are not my family and they're technically not my child.
Exactly.
Technically. And so, and I've gotten better and better, I think, at this as the years have gone on doing this work of saying the really hard thing
Mm-hmm.
in a way that still like holds the humanity of everybody at the table,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't shy away from saying the hard thing. And I think I can get away with it to a degree because I'm a middle-aged white woman with adult children, right? Who like has
Mm-hmm.
some title, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, but the work behind it, like my very first IEP meeting that I went to as an advocate, I was like, did not sleep the night before and was full on like had a trash can nearby because I was like, I might vomit. I was so nervous. I was sweating bullets because I was like literally having this internal dialogue of you don't know how to be confrontational. It makes you super, super nervous. You want everybody to feel good. And why the hell did you sign up to like be that voice in the room? What the hell is the matter with you?
I still ask that question, like, why do I deny B meetings?
Right. And yet it's gotten to a place where I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it fills my cup. It's such a trajectory, but I
Mm-hmm.
think that it's really important. Aaron and I was just talking to somebody about this the other day. When Aaron first had his Instagram account, as I so lovingly call it, um, he and I used to like at night, sort of write posts together. And then of course he was the face of the account, but I was like a little bit the engine behind the scenes. And we were having this conversation at one point, and he put it far more articulately than I'm going to in this moment because he's the writer of us, of the two of us. Um, but he was really talking about this role of advocate and that
Mm-hmm.
parents are put in this role and have to like learn how to be in this role even if it isn't in alignment with our temperament or our neurotype or what we're comfortable with, and how do we navigate these spaces when like this is totally out of our comfort zone and out of the
Mm-hmm.
realm of our understanding. right? Like he would get tripped up and still does get tripped up. And I think a lot of families do on like, this doesn't make any sense, right? I
Mm-hmm.
literally was just talking to my mom, I think it was this morning or yesterday, whatever it was. And she was like, I just think it's such a colossal waste of time that you come to every meeting and have to vomit out the same stuff about like, this is my kid's strengths and this is what I'm worried about. Like, didn't they get that shit last time? Like, she's just like, it doesn't make any sense to me. I would just tell them to cut to the fucking chase. And I'm like, okay, Sue. Okay, Susie Sue. But it's like, I do think that we have to acknowledge like this conversation's come up in community. I realize I'm having like 1,200 half thoughts and changing and shifting directions 1,000 times. I'm going to own it and apologize for it.
I'm used to it.
And that's why I love you. Um, but it's come up in community a lot, which is like, what accommodations do I need in this
Mm-hmm.
process as a neurodivergent parent, right? And one example I will share is this idea of recording the meetings, which I will state, this came up in the last episode. This is not a uniform thing that's allowed in all states. So there are
Mm-hmm.
some states where you are not allowed to record. Florida, I'm looking at you. Um, so ridiculous.
And that's because they know they're trash.
That's correct. Um, but for some families, they are not recording because they are playing gotcha. They are
Mm-hmm.
recording for their to meet their own needs. They're recording as an accommodation to themselves. And what came up in the parent group was we have a deaf parent in that group, so they need the recording because they can't track what's happening, and they have a cochlear implant, and they've
Mm-hmm.
got some aids to be able to amplify sound, but like it's not as accessible in real time.
Right.
And we've got a ton of like autistic and ADHDers and ADHDers in that room where
Processing speed.
right, the processing speed, I am so sorry, I'm activated, I'm in my amygdala. Like, what did you just say? Right? Like it's so overwhelming
Mm-hmm.
that the asking to record really isn't because I'm trying to catch you or I'm trying to be litigious in some way. It's because in order for me to be able to actually process what was said and what was decided and what was heard, I have to be able to go back and listen when I'm not in the room, like being asked questions and having all this information come at me. And I think that that's a really important piece to name for parents
Mm-hmm.
is that you can ask for accommodations for yourself.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. And like I have a parent who like, and this does come from in her case, it comes from a history of saying one thing and doing another as far as the school is concerned. But she's like, when we're making changes in the document, she wants the document pulled up as you're making the changes as you're saying it in the meeting.
Right.
And they know this. And she's like, I know. She's like, at this point, I'm just getting to the point where I'm just like, I don't have a problem saying it. Like, I'm no longer uncomfortable saying it because we have been doing the same dance now for years. And I've supported the learner. This is I'm going to say their third school year that I've supported during. And it's like, yeah, no, 100%. Like, she's like, I mean, that is, I was like, I don't know why we go through this every time. Like, you have, and this is Texas. So in Texas, people that aren't familiar, they have a diagnostician, and the diagnostician is a part of every meeting. Um, and so in this case, the diagnostician has been with us for 2 of these school years, so it's kind of like we got some familiar people that it's like, obviously
Right.
the gen ed teacher changes and the special education teacher changed, but so it's like, that this is what has to take place. But I absolutely think that that's where I hear a lot of resistance. Parents mention a lot of resistance from schools is that they're like, there's accommodating that I need. And one, I'm not comfortable asking for it because I'm already seeing as a parent of a neurodivergent learner that you are like fighting me to accommodate them. So
Right.
how are you going to take me needing accommodating? Right. But also, two, I've come across a situation where they're like,
you're shaming and guilting me as a parent. And so I don't want to ask for accommodating because then I feel like you're going to judge me more.
Right.
And I will say too, one of the things that I never had an issue with, and looking back was like, that was a mix of my autism and my upbringing, because I'm very much like my grandmother, who is my mother's mother, who is no longer with us. And she was a firecracker. And so I very much never had a problem with like saying things how they were and saying it how it is.
I like it.
And in my professional career, that was always the piece I got docked on in my performance reviews, was that I played well with my team, but not well with other teams. But for me, it was because the other teams were being incompetent. They were pretending to do things that they weren't going to do that my team was going to end up doing. But I noticed no matter the environment, so I worked for a predominantly Black company and I also worked for a predominantly white company. And in both environments, this was something I got docked on.
Interesting.
And I was like, so looking back, I was like, it was because of that social nuance I did not have with being straightforward and honest and just telling it like it is. And so one of the issues that was really surprising to all of my friends and family as I was advocating for my son was that I was very tiptoey. I was very not wanting to ruffle feathers. And I actually told them it was because it actually came from a respect factor of that my mother and sister were educators and I'd worked in school settings and I had seen what educators and administrators might go through and have to deal with.
Sure.
And so I wanted to be respectful of the fact, and I've supported them too as a mental health professional. So I wanted to be respectful of the fact that it's not just my child, right? And then I think what I did in that sense, thinking back to my autism and making the connection, is that I did generalize, right? So every educator is great and every educator cares and every administrator is making everything, because those are the people that I had known through my life.
Sure.
And presuming that there was no ill intent, and then coming across ill intent and being very confused and that's not connecting with the narrative that I have and what I know, and then having to regulate myself, and then realizing I'm being looked at as a parent and a professional, because for people who don't know, I am a certified trauma therapist for children. So it was like, why can you not help us help your child? And becoming even more dysregulated, and again, not knowing how to name that, thinking it's just parenting and not recognizing it was my neurodivergence, really going into burnout. And I think that's, something I want to kind of just approach as I'm stepping onto this, is that I do sometimes disagree with the burnout narrative, in that in the burnout narrative, sometimes there's perception, and I see this as a mental health professional too, when people go through depressive episodes. There's this perception that we can't access anything. And sometimes, depending on your role, you do continue to push through and access. And what I mean by that is there were periods where I was definitively in burnout and I had to hand over the advocacy side of things to my husband. So like we told the school, if there's an issue, you need to call him. If you need a parent to come up to the school, he needs to be the one to do it. And he could not tell me about it until we were home and that moment had passed. And I'd be like, oh, so how did today go? And he's like, yeah, they called me and I went up there and da-da-da-da and blah, blah, blah. But I also, in turn, was still a professional working. And I still had to get up and go to work.
Right.
But after my diagnosis, I found out I was, in fact, in burnout. So I say that because I do think that we have, and we talk about this all the time in the neurodivergence community, we do have children that are accessing the setting and they're in burnout.
Sure.
And then sometimes they do get to that point where they can't access it, but they were already in burnout. And so I say that because I just want to put that, kind of shine that spotlight in that I've at times questioned, as everyone is now learning about neurodivergence and like lived experience, which is great, and they're listening. I've sometimes, have found myself questioning like whether or not I was an actual burnout because people were like, well, you can do nothing. And I'm like, that is not always the case. And I want to be clear, you shouldn't be doing things, right? You need to reset and refresh that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying like it's just like in mental health, I have always had to help my clients understand that they were functioning in depression because they were
Right.
like, I got to pay my bills. So they're still getting up and going. But then when they're not paying their bills, they are in their house, not engaging with anyone, not engaging in things they enjoy, not accessing things outside of their bed. Like that is a depressive episode, right? And so same with burnout. Like I had to get up and go to work, but when I was not at work and I was in the house, it was like, I don't want to make any decisions. Don't ask me for anything extra. I am fighting for my life to parent, if you want to be honest. But I
Sure.
have these two little humans who depend on me because I had a 3 and a 5 year old. Like I have these two little humans who need me to function. So I did just kind of want to touch on that a little bit. It's just like,
Yeah.
I fully believe you can be in burnout and still access things, even though you really need to be focusing on self care and really need to be dropping all of demands and expectations around you. And that as adults, and especially as parents that are neurodivergent, we don't have that option.
Yeah. No, I have two things that came to mind while you were talking. The first one is just on a personal note, I find myself, and I don't know, I think it's a combination of things. I think it's a combination of the fact that my kids are older, um, and also that I have this understanding of myself, so I have a different lens of which I see myself through, is that I do think that I often exist in the sort of functional burnout space. And I will like
I
show up in all
agree.
the ways as best I humanly can. And then
Hmm.
as soon as I turn it off, I like can't tolerate. I mean, I can go from like, yeah, I'm in the meeting and I'm with the parent, I'm doing all the things. And the second I turn it off, I'm like, I will almost crawl into my living room and pull up the blanket and I'm like done. And then of course my husband will come in and be like, what's for dinner? And I'm like, your mom. Like, I'm not like cereal. I don't care. Like, I'm like, I can't do it. And
Right.
thankfully, he totally understands. He's like, you don't have to
Right.
do
Right.
anything. You don't have to worry about it. Like, and I'm like, I'm literally going to have a piece of toast with peanut butter and jelly and then a piece of Halloween candy. And that's how we're rolling. That's what's happening. Um, but what I have found is that I know I got into those places when my children were younger, and I never allowed myself to not cook the dinner or not do the
Hmm.
thing. But I think because my kids are older, I'm just like, I
Hmm.
can't do the thing. Right. My son is
Right.
actually living with us this year. My daughter has moved into her own apartment. She's local, but she's in her own apartment. But my son's taking a gap year. He graduated from university last year and going back into graduate school this coming year, hopefully. Um, and I'm like, I don't have time to play. Like if I am done, I'm done. So that was one thing I wanted to say is that I
Hmm.
think that, what are the ways that you can give yourself permission? And there might be seasons where you can do that differently than others.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, the other thing that you were talking about in terms of like sort of the disquieting moment of realizing that your conceptualization of educators maybe didn't apply to all.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think back to my daughter's fourth grade year, and the kinder teacher was lovely, but like it was a shitstorm, right? I actually liked
Hmm.
the first grade teacher, and I'm certain she was autistic. But like again, still a shitstorm. Second
Hmm.
grade teacher, I got nothing nice to say. I'm not even gonna try. And then she got kicked out and was at home with me. So her teacher was fabulous because it was me. No, I'm joking.
And just for clarification purposes, the teacher didn't get kicked out.
No, my daughter did.
Her daughter got kicked out.
And the district likes to tell this story that we removed her, and I'm like, you know. I mean, ultimately, I think it was the best thing. And our district has like an independent school of studies, so she like remained a district student. But like, if you're on YouTube, you're looking at her teacher, and if you're anywhere else, you're listening to her. And then in third grade, the best description of her teacher was she was vanilla. Like it was just like whatever. But her fourth grade teacher was batshit crazy. And I remember, and we'd been on this long roller coaster ride and things had been really, really hard in all the ways, right? And the attorneys at this point like had entered the scene and, you know. And I just remember the very first day of school. I can't remember what the hell she said, but I knew. And I remember calling my mom, who I think was having the same sort of disquieting experience. And in her super supportive and helpful way, as I'm dripping with sarcasm, she was like, Lisa, there's no way that she's awful too. Like, you are the common denominator here. And I was like, and thanks so much. But I think that I'm going to name it as grief because you had a belief in a system, right? My mom dedicated her entire career to public education. My whole family, her sisters, my cousins, my grandfather, like, and my grandmother, like, so many of us were public educators. Some went into administration, some were in counseling, some were in counseling and coaching. My grandfather was a coach, high school coach, and counselor. And to realize that there's some folks in that system that are actively harming. There is some ill intent. I don't think it's the general rule of thumb, but it exists. And when you enter into the world of special education, there's some fuckery that goes on, in large part because there's a political motivation behind that.
Right.
There's a systematic oppression that is behind that it's really disquieting. And there is a grief of the system isn't what you thought that it was. And how do you reconcile that? And it's hard.
Wow. I don't know if you caught my face, kind of emotional for a minute there and had to like pull it back because that's in fact what it was. And anyone, and Lisa knows this better than anyone at this point, anyone that's ever listened to me tell the story of how I got into advocacy in the space and what we endured with my son, I always tell it in a way that now, looking at as a mental health therapist, was grief, because I tell it in the space of I had this perception because of who I'd been around, who raised me, who were my friends, and then knowing my child. And I want to really point that out for parents, like knowing that I'm getting a little emotional.
You can get emotional.
Knowing that I had this this just amazing, loving, caring, beautiful boy who is now questioning himself as a person and saying, Mommy, I don't want to be bad.
Right.
And knowing, like, what are you even talking about? Like, we've never said that about you. We've never called you bad. We would never say that, you know, and having to reframe that for him and being ticked off, to be honest, like, how dare you like make my son feel that way? Right. And again, just for recap, for those that don't know, my son's kindergarten teacher, that my son's kindergarten year was the reason I became an advocate, but his teacher was phenomenal.
Right.
And she was amazing. And she actually went back to school to become a school counselor because of my son and how she saw how he wasn't being treated how he should have been treated and understood. And she wanted to learn more about how to support learners like him. So amazing woman, but administration was the issue. And whenever I tell the story, I do realize that, when I was at my wits' end and doing it alone, and when I say that, I mean like me and my husband were doing it alone. Like we were a
Right.
great team, united, working together. I want to make that clear. We were on the same page about like something's not right. We just don't know what. Because his family has educators as well too. He had an uncle who was an assistant superintendent. And
Mhm.
so he was like, that's why his thing was like, well, I don't know what we do, but I know we can go to the superintendent, but
Right.
like when I tell the story and when I finally decided to step out of being alone, I went to my educator friends and my social worker friends and my administrator friends, and they were like, that is not how this is supposed to go.
Right.
That is not okay. Like that is not how. And they really gave me permission. And I do think, again, that goes back to my neurodivergence. They gave me permission to rock the boat. They gave me permission without feel like I was betraying those I knew, those I cared about. And if you know anything about neurodivergence and neurodivergent learners, they are incredibly protective over those that they perceive as their people, whether it is their parents, their siblings, their friends, their classmates, to the point where if it's like, who bullied you, if they don't perceive that person as a bully, even though the situation speaks to that, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about, or that's not what it was. Right. And so looking at my own neurodivergence, I felt like they gave me permission to question the system
Yeah.
without me feeling like I was saying that about them, because going back to that generalization piece.
Right.
And
Right.
that's why if you look at my content, I am so quick when anyone says you're bashing educators to be like, I'm absolutely fucking not.
Yeah. No, I don't respond terribly well to that either. I'm like, okay, so I'm bashing
And
myself.
well, and I've
Basically,
had
my
this
whole
opportunity.
family, like,
Yeah,
okay,
I've had this
I am, you're
opportunity
correct.
too, to where educators will get in my comments and be like, I'm an educator. I love her content. She absolutely is not bashing educators. And if you feel that way, then clearly XYZ. And I don't even have to say
Right.
anything. You know what I mean? But I'm
Right. Yeah.
like, that is far from what I would ever do. But no, I think, and we're going to have a great episode, by the way, guys, in part 2, where we do bring on a therapist that is really going to dive into grief and how you address that. Because, that's going to be one of our first guests as we, headed to part 2. We're looking at periodically sometimes bringing on someone else to speak about specific topics that we feel like, should be addressed, and so that's something that we're going to be stepping into. So I'm excited about that.
Me too. And it's just to give a little tease. Um, it's the therapist. So I made a reel after coming out of an IEP meeting where grief was lifted up as what was perhaps happening for the learner. And it was a really sort of stunning aha moment for me, and I think for everyone in the room. And so I, hopped on to Instagram and unscripted shared, the
Mm-hmm.
moment. And I think it was really resonant, and it's kind of gone cuckoo crazy. And
Mm-hmm.
so the therapist reached out and said, if you'd like, I'd be more than happy to come onto the podcast to chat about it. And um, she is one of my favorite people. We've worked with the same family for quite some time, and she's a delight. And so I'm excited to bring her into the village, so to speak. So yeah, that'll be, and I trust her. I trust her
Mm-hmm.
wisdom. I trust her insight. I trust her perspective. Um, and I'm just going to leave it at that. And you'll get more information about her and who she is and the work she does. And I'm going to let her do all that when she's here. But yeah, I mean, I think that at the time, the timing of this, to just sort of set it in a larger framework,
Mm-hmm.
um, was 2015. And so we were on the cusp of a really pivotal presidential election. Um, and, to like going back to like circling back to kind of extending my mom grace.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but part of what I think we were responding to was not just like the school system not being what we thought it was, which
Mm-hmm.
I had been on that journey because I'd been living this not pleasantry for many years, but there was something about like re-entering another year with like absolutely the worst educator we had come across. Like, it really, I can't say anything kind about her because there's nothing kind to say, unfortunately. And unfortunately, that happens and that exists. Um, but, then we, had our current president get elected back in 2016. And um, that was a really pivotal moment personally. Um, my daughter at the time, um, she and I were living with my parents. It's a long story, but she was attending a non-public school, not local to us, and so it was local to my folks. And so we were sharing a pull-out couch at my folks' house for a year, and kind of going back and forth. And she sobbed and cried for hours, just repeating over and over and over again, "My president hates me," um, because he'd made fun of disabled people, and he clearly was misogynistic. And she at 11 years old felt incredibly unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so to have like systems not be what you thought they were or what they were supposed to be was really hard in that moment. And I feel like that's a piece of what's happening now is that
Mm-hmm.
he's back, it's accelerated, the systems we've relied on are crumbling. The flaws within those systems are being exposed in ways that feel really poignant,
Mm-hmm.
um, differently vulnerable. Maybe they've always been this vulnerable, but haven't been challenged in the way that they are right now. Um, but I think that that's a piece of um, I think it's a piece of the landscape that we have to acknowledge as neurodivergent humans who are sensitive to what's happening around us and how that's sort of informing our own personal bandwidth. And it's definitely, there's a direct impact on public schools and what's happening within public schools and what advocacy looks like within those spaces in
Mm-hmm.
response to what's happening in the broader climate.
No, I think, yeah, you hit the nail on the head 100%. And my son started school right after, after, but in the midst of the pandemic. So he started school where we weren't let yet. He started kindergarten in 2021. So, and the pandemic hit in 2020. So he started when we weren't yet um, allowed back in schools yet as parents. Like we couldn't come
Right.
observe, we couldn't do any of those things. So I didn't
Right.
have the ability, like I will prompt my parents to do now, of like, go observe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, we didn't have that ability. So we were stuck on what there's like he wore a mask to his when he was in kindergarten, which, keeping a mask on a 3 and a 5-year-old, I'm gonna tell you right now. It was a
I couldn't
nightmare.
keep it on my 18-year-old. My
But then
daughter
we
was
all
like, "This is the rule. I'll do it." And the fact that it's like grotesquely uncomfortable, like, that's fine. I'll keep wearing it because that's what you told me I'm supposed to do and I'm supposed to protect people. Fine. My son was like, "Fuck this." Always like halfway.
well, and then again, pre-diagnosis. So we didn't know my son was autistic, and he had very quickly started to generalize black or white. Things are unsafe, picking up some of that rumination on health and cleanliness. Like we
Yeah.
ended up seeing
Yeah, that's
all
tricky.
that in the
Sure.
midst of
That's
the
tricky.
pandemic and things. And we had to really work with him on like, I mean, even before he entered kindergarten, because again, he was in the child development center during that time. Like his teacher was like, I'm starting to notice, like I'm getting concerned. Like there's things that like, and he would get very upset when kids did not wash their hands, which was like children are not going to wash their hands. But he was like, we're going to get sick, and we
Right.
had to really work with him on that. And so like, but navigating all that and just looking at, parenting as a neurodivergent, I think one, you learn a lot about yourself. And I think we now have access to supports in communities like Lisa's and public spaces and social media accounts and podcasts like this where you're not so alone. But I know Lisa and I can both speak to like when we were initially navigating the space. And I know Lisa has talks a lot about being, thankfully like being welcomed into a group where she had parents that had older learners who had already like kind of, went on that journey. And for me, because at that point there were a lot of like, because again, during COVID time, it went from a lot of in person to virtual. So I also had the opportunity to Google and come across all this virtual support because whereas I wouldn't have had maybe he started school in 2019, because now everybody was like, we have to figure out a way to put everything online because it's not necessarily safe for us to meet in person anymore. And so I do think that that really opened up me finding that support and also being able to access more information on my own neurodivergence. But I also think when it comes to figuring out where you need to accommodate and support yourself, every neurodivergent individual is different. Just like you meet one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. What regulates me doesn't necessarily regulate my son. What dysregulates me doesn't necessarily dysregulate my son. And so as a parent, you have to recognize your cues as well and your triggers, and then accommodate and create those spaces. During early on in in their advocacy journey for my son, I very quickly realized, okay, this is when I need like dad to tap in. Which, by the way, my husband is neurodivergent as well, and he's ADHD, and so I realized very early on, like I can start to recognize when this is keeping me up, or I'm ruminating, or I'm pacing and putting a hole in the floor, and it's because of this, and I need for that to be alleviated by you taking the phone call. So I know, okay, they're not going to call me because they have to call you. And so that will lift that anxiety for those few hours, right? So it's like it's going to take, unfortunately, I think, situations and experiences for you to recognize where you need to accommodate yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And a thought that I had sort of as an offshoot of that is I think that one of the benefits of being neurodivergent yourself to a neurodivergent child is some of that modeling that comes along with like, I need to accommodate this need. I am dysregulated and this helps me and this is what I'm gonna, right? My husband and my daughter will refer to each other as brain twins. Which cracks me up. And I think sometimes she gets irritated by it, fair enough. But I think other times there's like deep solidarity and feeling really seen, that there's somebody in your immediate family that really sees you and holds space for you, and you don't have to like explain who you are, or right? Like, I just there's some power in really truly being able to see your kid. And that's not to say that neurotypical parents can't or don't, but there's something about that sort of shared experience that's really pretty powerful.
No, 100%. And my son always says, he's like, Mommy, you get me, you understand me. And so, just in case anyone's, unfamiliar, I'm autistic and ADHD. My oldest son is autistic. My youngest son is ADHD. And then my husband is ADHD. And so a lot of times when we are walking through situations or conversations, I almost immediately can see what my son was thinking and why the response was the way it was. And one that's from that relationship building with him. Um, and two, it's from being autistic and having that black or white view of things and recognizing why he saw that thing literally or the way it did. And in turn, being a parent, sometimes when I feel like I have tried to prevent something and it still happens, then I can get frustrated. Or if it's like, um, as a parent, right? Because I'm still a parent, like I know, the right quote unquote way to handle that or do that. And so you get frustrated. But I think what you're really talking about too is that other side, is that beauty of the connection and the relationship and the understanding and the beauty of being the safe space and place, because I have gotten the ability to understand where that's coming from and to see where you need support and recognize where accommodating is needing and recognize how I've accommodated, or maybe even have that understanding of how I've been looked at negatively because of having to accommodate, and understanding how you might feel about accessing that and that shame and that guilt, and just a connection that is only present because of you having the same things. And what I mean by that, in the sense of like when we talk about like neurotypical parents, there's neurotypical parents that are completely advocating and supporting their children in a neuroaffirming way. And but at the other side of that, like my dad doesn't understand what it is like to be a military spouse and mother because he was not one. He was the service member. He was the dad. And so, but my mom can understand because she was a military spouse.
Sure.
And she was a mom, right? So in those connections, it is those similarities, right? And so, and it's like, my husband always says like he doesn't understand what it's like to be autistic, but he can connect because he's neurodivergent. So,
Right.
and sometimes those little pieces matter, like the difference in because it's looking at
Oh,
the
yeah.
differences in capacity and things like that. But at the same time, what we're saying is that insight really shapes everything that we do. And I think it's even more so shaped our advocacy work because as parents, and I'll have my parents tell me this all the time, they'll say, like, the reason I hired you is not because of your advocate experience. The reason I hired you is because you're a parent
Oh,
and
yeah.
because you have been on this side of the table and you have dealt with it from that standpoint. And so when I'm frustrated and I'm struggling, you get that. And as an advocate, you have that professional ability to support me. But as a parent, you're not dismissive because you know what I've been through and what I'm going through.
Yeah. And I 1,000%. And I would add to that that I feel like I just had this experience earlier this week, and I feel like it happens a lot, and I imagine it happens a lot for you as well, is that not only do parents feel safety and connection with us because we are parents, but I find that sometimes I'm one of the first people who is really humanizing their child and delighting in their child and seeing their child as a whole person and isn't afraid to talk about the disability, isn't afraid to, right? Like, and they're used to systems that are more pathologizing or deficit
Mm-hmm.
focused or the behavior is a problem or whatever it may be. The family I'm thinking of, they're new to me. I just started working with them this week and they are so delightful. And they have a non-speaker,
Mm-hmm.
young, and they really like the team and this and that, but their child is having a difficult time and they just did an FBA and like this report came home and it's like, oh my gosh in heaven. There was all these like quote unquote unsafe behaviors and they read it and their stomachs ended up in their throats and they were
Mm-hmm.
like, what do we do with it? And so to have somebody enter the space, A, who's read like a million of these, but
Mm-hmm.
also just understands the pain of having a capture of your child not really capture the full breadth of who your child is as a human and what that feels like to sit in that pain and that discomfort. And then how do we then engage with the team in a way that um, honestly like alters the report,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, but shifts perspective if perspective needs to be shifted. And so I
100%.
do think that that's a piece of it is it's not just like I had one parent, it was so like such a moment where the father told the team when I read Lisa's revision
Mm-hmm.
of your behavior intervention plan, it was the first time I'd ever read anything about my son that framed him as a human. And
Mm-hmm.
everything else I've ever gotten from this team, including the report that she revised, read like a rap sheet, like that he was a criminal.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that it's a combination of things. But I think people are drawn to us initially because we're
Mm-hmm.
parents and they're like, oh my God, they know this, they've had this experience. But I think the
Mm-hmm.
reason why they stay or keep coming back
Mm-hmm.
is that we truly, authentically care about their child and really see them in the full breadth of who they are as a human, and
Mm-hmm.
then enter into what can be an uncomfortable space and respectfully demand that the team does the same.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I've found myself as I am, I mean, absolutely not everyone I know, and I have no problem telling like a complete stranger I'm autistic and ADHD now, um, because I've just like, I don't want to hide it anymore. Um,
Fair
it's
enough.
exhausting, and I'm like, I don't care if you know, I don't care if like,
Right.
um, but I find myself in the meeting when I'm getting ready to explain something, if that hasn't already been explained. So, like, if I give my spiel in the beginning of the meeting, I'm like, I am Dr. Destiny Huff. I'm a mental health therapist. I'm a family advocate. I am a certified trauma therapist for children. I'm late diagnosed autistic and ADHD, and I have two children in special education. So that is why the family brought me on the team. That is a very powerful piece of them going like, oh shit. Like you
Right.
have the personal and professional to
Right.
back whatever it is you're about to say. So if I don't get to do that introduction, because sometimes it's just like, oh, I'm Dr. Destiny Huff, I'm the family advocate, right? When I get ready to say what I'm going to say, which usually is around the time we are talking about regulation, social emotional, anything dealing with social skills, goals by the counselor, social worker, psychologist, anything with pragmatics, all the areas in which regulation, executive functioning play a part, right?
Right.
Anytime we get into that piece when I get ready to speak, I say, and what I'm about to say is because, and I do give the whole
Yeah.
little spiel I just gave. And I do that because I need them to understand that this is lived experience for me as a parent and as a neurodivergent person. And so I am coming from a place of helping you understand that this is a child and they are a person and that they deserve that understanding. And so I think you're 100% correct. I have had times where just my reviewing of an IEP, the parent comes back and it's like, every suggestion you gave was great. It was awesome. Yeah, I thought I could take that back to the team. I don't know that I'm going to explain it the way you explain it. I need you in the meeting. I have had
Right.
families with siblings where I supported one sibling at one IEP meeting and all their annuals are like in different dates through the year. And the
Oh
parent
yeah,
comes
of
back and is
course.
like, I'm gonna need to hire you for this child as well.
Right.
Because like what you did there, and I'm thinking of a family in particular who I absolutely love, but they have an elementary learner, a middle learner, and a high school learner.
Oh,
And so
you're just covering all the
so
bases.
they had so they
Okay.
had they cover the whole gambit. And I actually supported the high school learners meeting first,
Okay.
which had a more complex profile, I feel, as far as that support piece. And then came the middle school learner, which has the least complex profile. And then came the youngest learner who was an AAC user. And so they're finally navigating that piece of regulation and access. And so they brought me in for that one. And so now we've covered the gambit. And really, genuinely, the family was like, you made us feel heard. You made us feel validated. You made us feel like we're not crazy when we're looking at what support our child needs. And like, you gave them another lens to where we could see in the meeting that their wheels were actually turning and they were realizing how they were framing our learner, right, who is 6 years old, by the way. And so in predominantly white team, by the way, Black family. So it is very interesting. And I do think that our neurodivergence significantly plays a role in how we even view support and how that support can be shaped.
Yeah. I'm noticing time and
yeah,
we should probably wrap up, but there's so many other things I want to say. And I think the last one I will say, just because I've seen it come up on social media a couple of times in the last few days, and I think that this is really important too, and it's come up actually in community, is like filling out those kind of rating forms and all that kind of stuff during assessments it's really, really, really tricky and difficult as a neurodivergent human because those forms suck. Let's just keep it real honest. They're ableist trash for the most part. But if you and your child share a neurotype or are both neurodivergent, the way you're going to fill out those forms is different. And that difference could look a million different ways, but it's not the same thing as a neurotypical parent filling out those forms. And I'm not saying that filling it out as a neurotypical parent is not a painful experience, because no matter what, it's a painful experience. But I just think, to just quickly piggyback on the last statement that you made about the accommodations and support, like through a neurodivergent lens as a neurodivergent parent, is going to potentially look different than it would be through a neurotypical parent or educator's lens. But I think the rating forms, just the assessment process, where the pieces where parents get brought in, I think is impacted also by our neurodivergence and how we complete those forms. And as I've counseled, probably not the right word since I'm not an attorney, but as I've advised, that's a better word. You don't have to. You don't have to fill those forms out. You can let the team know that you would rather have a conversation with them, or you'd rather just write a narrative sort of generally addressing the things that they're asking about. But if you don't want to fill out a rating form because it just feels so icky, don't.
And I've also, when parents have completed things, and especially looking at FBAs, my son had an FBA and has a behavior plan. I've had it where, because of those standardized tools and the way in which it's framed, like, the functions of behavior, I have actually had them state that, this is an identified function of behavior based on the standardized tools that were completed. However, we understand that this is destiny needing support in XYZ, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And I have yet to have a team that is not responsive to that. And I have yet to have a parent that didn't feel like that captured the whole picture. And the team themselves going like, no, yeah, because they are like in agreement, but they're also like, that's not our wheelhouse, right? Like, we don't know, like we just know we fill this out. We don't actually, like, that's not our training. That's not all this. And so I have had the ability to, from an advocacy and a parent standpoint, to be able to get them to document it in that way as well, to kind of understand. And, this is a caveat, being neuroaffirming, and I had this conversation with a parent too. If we've done all the things and tried all the things in the sense of like, we've looked through the IEP and all those pieces, and we realize that we're not getting a full picture of what is going on for the learner, I have been responsive to FBAs being done and BIPs because, and Lisa knows, where I stand on this, because it does give me an idea of what the team thinks is going on with the learner. And if they do it right, it gives you enough information to then state what is actually going on with the learner. And what I mean by that is if they're giving those full observations and pieces where they're like, oh, it was right before, reading, and we know the learner struggles with reading. It's like, well, we know then what the issue is. And doesn't mean you have to then even turn that into a behavior plan, right? Because FBAs are done sometimes just to get information. And then they're like, well, we don't think that this even needs to move forward to a plan. But I say that because I have heard a lot now as we're going into neuroaffirming spaces. I am hearing a lot of like parents that are coming to me and they're like, well, I told them I don't want an FBA done because somebody told me like they're just going to pathologize my child. And I'm like, a lot of times the people saying that are not giving the full picture and they're not having the full understanding. And sometimes that is the case. That is what they may be trying to do. But what I'm saying is a lot of times where they're hearing that from, it's just someone going, I'm neuroaffirming, don't do this. And there's no explanation or understanding about the nuance behind that.
No, it's super nuanced. And I am transparent that I don't love FBAs. I don't love the pathologizing piece. I don't love the like trying to quote unquote determine the function of the behavior because there's a lot of presumption that's happening. There's not enough nuance for me. There's too much that you can't quote unquote observe per se.
Mm-hmm.
But I also feel like they can provide a framework to work within.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the idea that behavior intervention plans can easily map into a brain state aligned accommodation plan.
Absolutely.
And so and Instagram or Facebook or wherever are tricky places to have nuanced conversations because as somebody who doesn't love sitting and listening to Lisa is seeking attention and trying to escape the whatever. And I'm like, Jesus, stop talking.
That part.
I very, very, very rarely tell a family to not have them do it if it's being brought up. And there's times I even recommend having it done.
Absolutely.
Because I do feel fairly confident in my ability to work with a team to get it to a place where it is a brain state aligned accommodation plan. It is more nuanced. And it does give us more of a guide for the team to be able to work with the learner in ways that is more nuanced, as I've run out of words, apparently. But yeah.
No, absolutely. So again, this is a topic that will always be weaved through our podcast because we're neurodivergent and we're raising neurodivergent learners. And as you've heard through the last 12 episodes, we are always going to pull on our lived experience. We're all, whether it's us as advocates or Lisa as an educator, me as a mental health professional, or us as parents or just neurodivergent individuals. And we just really wanted to, again, kind of just pull back the curtain and show you that, like, we don't always have our shit together. And that it's a process.
Wait, no, I don't.
Lisa's got a poppet. She's got a black poppet that she's holding. And I mean, I'm sitting in a chair that allows me to move, and you've seen me move several times, and I don't even do trainings like sitting still and not moving and not fidgeting and everything else. So, and I know you've noticed me not making eye contact. But we really just wanted to kind of in, part 1 of season 1 and just letting you know that, again, this is an affirming space. We want everyone to be able to come here and learn. If you're a neurodivergent yourself, like, we get the struggles and the battles, but also hope that you can see the strength behind what we're doing. And most importantly, this podcast was really created to support neurodivergent learners and to put another lens that our families get in every conversation and every day that we bring to them, to everyone else.
Yeah, Absolutely. We hope you all have a restful respite away from school, all the things. We know that the holidays can be a really tricky time. So
Right.
I know that it can be hard. So I don't want to be like, it's joyful and wonderful, because it's not necessarily, for a million reasons. But we are excited to come back, and we haven't decided on a date, late January, mid-January, somewhere in that
Yeah,
time.
we'll definitely be back in January. We haven't decided on a date yet just because of not just school getting back, but like giving our editing team time to edit and giving a chance to figure out how we're going to record. Because, fun fact, we never have a recording schedule. We just literally decide the week of, like, we need to record, and we record.
Like night before. Yeah, exactly. But we have lots of topics that we still are wanting to dive into. We want to talk about data. We want to talk about presuming competence. Like, there's so many things, and of course we want to be kind of relevant and responsive to what's happening in real time. And we know that there will be things that happen in the new year that we will want to speak to as they happen.
Absolutely. So thank you for joining us on this journey so far. Please go back and listen to the episodes, listen to them whenever you get the chance, whenever you have the capacity. Let us know your thoughts, and always let us know, what is something that you're like, hey, you briefly touched on this in an episode, and I love for you guys to really dive into it, and we will definitely put that on the schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. Yay.
Thank you again for joining us here in the Affirming Village. We're your co-hosts, Dr. Destiny Huff and Lisa Baskin Wright, and we hope today's conversation leaves you feeling seen, supported, and better equipped to advocate for yourself or your learner. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with someone else in the village. Until next time, keep advocating, keep affirming, and keep building the village we all deserve.